They said peace was possible. They said the interstellar accord would hold. They lied. The last transmission from Earth came 2 weeks ago. A single phrase, sterile and final. Negotiations have failed. Then nothing, not a signal, not a whisper, just silence across all human channels. And that silence, it echoed louder than any declaration of war ever could. He sat at the edge of the ship's observation deck, watching the swirling gas giant below. Captain Merrick wasn't one for poetry, but even he had to admit, Juno 4 looked like the eye of a storm. It was the same feeling he had in his chest, that swirling, choking anticipation that something irreversible had already begun. Merrick had been the lead envoy for the Terran Coalition's final round of negotiations with the Cavor Dominion. 5 years of talks, 5 years of backroom deals, manipulative alien diplomacy, and constant pressure to bend the knee for galactic harmony. And then the Cavor broke the last accord before the ink dried, if you could even call it ink when half the treaties were signed in mind-linked thought vaults. He didn't need a council report to know what happened next. Earth going silent wasn't a glitch. It was a statement. One that made every species in the known galaxy uncomfortable. Humans didn't go quiet. Humans screamed, fought, rebelled, even mourned loud. Silence wasn't in their blood unless something broke, truly broke, past the point of repair. That silence meant one thing. Retaliation was no longer being planned. It was already in motion. Merrick stood and stepped into the command corridor. The bridge was dim-lit, quiet, and tense. His crew, made up of hardened Terran veterans, ex-Marines, and a few rogue asteroid miners, didn't need orders. They already knew where they were headed. The edge of Cavor space. Not to talk. Not this time. "Status?" he asked. Lieutenant Arlen, a wiry man with permanent bags under his eyes and too many lost friends behind his stare, replied without looking up. "Stealth field holding. Navigation is burning soft thrusters. We'll be in Cavor territory in 20 hours. No contact? None. Like Earth, everyone's gone dark. Every human ship, every relay, every AI whisper node. We're black." Merrick nodded. That was part of the plan? It had to be. If Earth was silent, it meant they weren't interested in dialogue anymore. They were listening to something else now. The sound of the enemy dying. The Cavor probably didn't see it coming. They were arrogant, like most of the old empires. Too used to fighting each other with political sabotage and economic pressure. They thought humanity would be the same. Soft, flexible, easily shamed into submission with guilt about war, history, and peacekeeping. What they didn't understand, or refused to believe, was that humanity didn't just survive war. We evolved in it. We made art from it. We made legends out of loss and myths from vengeance. And now, with no words left to speak, we were returning to our native language. Violence. "Captain," Arlen spoke again, this time a slight edge in his voice. "Picking up a long-range burst from Alpha Centauri relay node. It's encrypted. Terran military code. Black level." Merrick's pulse spiked. Black level codes were only used for one thing: autonomous engagement directives. They weren't messages. They were orders embedded in silence. It meant someone at Earth Command had flipped the switch. "Open it," he ordered. The main display lit up with a single image. A Cavor dreadnought, or what was left of it. The hull was fractured in 3 places. Entire chunks had been vaporized, as if someone had surgically removed parts of the ship mid-fight. Life signatures, 0. Transmission logs, blank. It had been killed cleanly, without broadcasting distress. No call for mercy, no warning. Merrick felt something tighten in his throat. Not fear, Not yet. Just awe. Because he knew what this meant. Somewhere out there, other Terran ships, maybe ghost fleets long thought decommissioned, had already begun the counterattack. Quiet, surgical, deadly, and not a single word was being said about it. The galaxy was watching, waiting for Earth to explain itself. But Earth had no more words, only silence. And silence in the hands of humans had become the deadliest weapon the stars had ever seen. The crew didn't cheer when they saw the Cavor dreadnought's wreckage. No one shouted, no one laughed. There was no joy in vengeance yet, not until the score was even, and even then, Merrick doubted there would be much left in anyone to celebrate. What they felt instead was confirmation. A cold, grim satisfaction that humanity wasn't rolling over this time. Merrick leaned forward in the captain's chair, staring at the burned-out husk on the screen. The dreadnought had been one of the diplomatic guard ships, untouchable by treaty law. That didn't matter anymore. Earth had made its choice. He felt it deep in his bones. "Get me the decoded metadata," he ordered. "I want the signature trace, energy discharge patterns, all of it." Arlen tapped in commands, fingers flying across the console with military precision. Matching weapon signatures suggest Valkyrie-class rail systems. That's Terran. Long-range precision strike from subspace warp shells. Multiple synchronized impacts. Probably launched from a stealth cruiser. Maybe two. So the Valkyries were in play. Ghost ships. Once just myths told among deep space Terran outposts. Crewed by men and women so off the books that half of them weren't even in Earth's census anymore. People like Merrick had heard of them, but they were never meant to be deployed unless Earth was done talking. That realization chilled the bridge more than the dark silence itself. "Where was it hit?" Merrick asked. Arlen magnified the damage markers. Life support, engine core, command deck, clean hits, no collateral, no hull splinters. Whoever did this knew exactly where every Cavor breathes, sleeps, and gives orders. No wasted rounds. Merrick stood up slowly, stretching his shoulders. "So much for savage humans. Tell me, Arlen, what kind of savages do surgical strikes in perfect sync while the enemy is still mid-patrol?" Arlen glanced up, his expression hard. "The kind who've been waiting for years to shut up and pull the trigger." Merrick's boots echoed against the steel floor as he paced the command deck. There was a weight pressing down on everything now. A gravity not from the planet below, but from the understanding that Earth had finally taken off the leash. No more protest, no more concessions, no more ambassadors being made to bow in alien courts and listen to lectures about peace while colonies burned. The Cavor were not a subtle enemy. They smiled with flat teeth, patted backs with four-fingered hands, then sent mercenary fleets to raid Terran border worlds by night. And Earth kept taking it, hoping that diplomacy would buy time, time to grow, time to unify. But all it bought was more death. Now Earth was silent. And silence from a species like humanity was more terrifying than all the screams of war combined. The door to the bridge slid open with a hiss. Commander Briggs walked in, bulkier than most, wearing a reinforced combat rig even though they were still in stealth ops. His face bore the scars of 1,000 decisions made too late. The man had seen more broken treaties than successful ones. "We just got another encrypted relay," Briggs said without preamble. "Same black-level code. 2 more Cavor ships down. 1 in the Vosari system, another at the fringe of Lutek space. No survivors." Merrick didn't flinch. "Coordinated?" "Definitely. Multiple fleets, moving in sync across sectors. Stealth recon probes deployed in advance. Pattern suggests global Terran ops. All units silent. Not one message being transmitted back to Earth. They're not asking permission. They're already acting under standing threat response." standing threat response. That was the protocol buried beneath all the diplomatic gloss, hidden in the folds of military doctrine, written only in blood. It meant, if humanity is betrayed again, do not wait. Erase, eliminate. Make the galaxy understand what we truly are. Merrick stared at the Cavor wreckage one more time, then shut off the main display. Prep the ship, he said. No more recon. We move in. Arlen turned, startled. Sir, if we move into Cavor space, we risk... We risk nothing we haven't already been given, Merrick snapped. Negotiations are dead. Earth is dark. We're not diplomats anymore. We're the answer. Briggs grinned faintly. About damn time. The ship, TNS Omen, had never been meant for heavy combat. She was a long-range LPS vessel, modified for infiltration and extraction, fast, quiet, and filled with blacklisted weapon tech that Terran Command had denied even existed. But now, in a galaxy where the rules no longer mattered, it might just be the most dangerous thing floating between stars. The crew moved like predators let off the leash. No one asked questions. No one debated the morality of retaliation. They had seen too much, lost too many. Every person on that bridge had a name etched into their skin, names of friends and family from the colonies, from the border stations, from failed peace summits that turned into slaughters. War wasn't coming. War was already here. 12 hours later, Omen breached the Cavor sector wall. A network of satellites blinked to life, scanning. The Cavor defense net was sharp, but it was built for pirates and smugglers, not Terran stealth cruisers, not a ship designed to be the first thing a traitor never sees. Briggs, Merrick said. Pick our first target. Briggs pulled up the sector map. There's a logistics relay base just outside Galkar's belt. Unarmed, mid-tier population, mostly military traffic and supply caches. Easy target. We hit it fast, leave it hollow. Collateral? Briggs looked him in the eye. Minimal. Most Cavor installations are automated. We'll be targeting infrastructure, no civilians. Merrick nodded. Make it surgical. I want it gutted, not smeared. Within minutes, the ship dropped into high-velocity approach. Cloaked, undetectable, invisible against the void. From a Cavor perspective, the base was functioning normally until the first impact came. The railgun fired 3 times in silence. Each shot landed with such precision that even the base's alarm systems failed to register the attack before they went offline. The power grid died, communications ceased, docking bays imploded inward, crushing the ship's inside like tin cans. The AI control core fried in a single electromagnetic spike. 14 seconds later, the Cavor relay base was dead. Not destroyed, not obliterated. Dead, clean, quiet, surgical. It didn't even broadcast a distress call. There was nothing left to warn the others. Merrick sat back, watching the black hole of data now replacing the base on their map. Another silence added to the growing choir. He tapped a button. Broadcast a single data pulse. Let them know. Arlen turned. What do we send? Merrick stared into the void. One word. A pause, then silence. The pulse shot through the system. It would reach Cavor Command in hours. It wouldn't carry threats or ultimatums, just that single word. A message that said, "We're done speaking. Your war started with lies. Ours starts with silence." And they would feel it. In every comms blackout, in every lost patrol, in every system that simply went dark without warning or reason. One by one, Cavor Command ships would begin to fear the quiet. Officers would start to question every second without a ping from the stars. Paranoia would spread. Trust would decay. They would learn what it meant to provoke a species that had spent millennia clawing its way up through war, betrayal, and extinction. A species that no longer needed words to deliver its wrath. Humanity was done explaining itself. The next Cavor target was already on screen. A fuel depot on the rim of Helix sector. Big, bold, important. Merrick locked eyes with Briggs. "Let's make this one louder." Briggs cracked his knuckles. "With pleasure." As Omen drifted into the shadows once more, Merrick allowed himself a rare thought. Not of peace, but of justice. Not the kind found in courts or treaties, but the kind you feel deep in your chest when you take back power after being pushed for too long. Humanity had been too patient, too kind, too diplomatic. But now they were quiet. And in that quiet, entire civilizations would learn what it meant to spit in the face of mankind and think they'd get away with it. They didn't sleep much on the Omen anymore. Sleep meant dreams. Dreams meant memories. And memories were a luxury Merrick and his crew couldn't afford. Not while they were gutting Cavor infrastructure piece by piece, tearing out the lifeblood of an empire that had once looked down on humanity as a savage, barely civilized species. Now those savages were dismantling the galaxy's oldest dominion in total, methodical silence. Merrick leaned over the tactical console as the next op finalized. The Omen hovered in the dead space above Helix sector, cloaked and humming with contained fury. The Cavor refueling depot below was sprawling. Dozens of transport corridors, 3 massive fuel reservoirs, hundreds of personnel. Not all soldiers, not all innocent either. Briggs approached from the side, face blank, voice calm. "You sure about this one, Captain? It's a civilian-military blend. Could be collateral." Merrick didn't look away from the screen. Collateral started the day they bombed Terra Prime's envoy ship with children on board and called it an internal glitch. Briggs didn't argue. He just nodded and turned back toward the weapons station. That was the thing about Merrick. He didn't give speeches. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than any admiral's order. "Targets locked," Arlen reported. Merrick's voice was gravel. "Same approach, fast, clean, precise, but this time, leave one corridor open. I want them to see what silence looks like." The crew moved like a machine. No debates, no questions. They were past all of that now. The only language that made sense in this galaxy anymore was destruction. At 0400 hours Terran Standard Time, Omen fired. The first strike hit the depot's main energy spine. Power vanished in an instant. No backup, no time to respond. The second shot detonated the fuel reservoir. Not the volatile center, but the cooling mechanisms. Fire erupted, but only in one quadrant. Controlled. Intentional. Enough to create chaos without obliterating the entire base. Then the final railgun shell, coated in EM disruption tech, sliced through the communications core. The Cavor could still scream inside, but no one would hear them. No backup would come. No messages would escape. They were cut off, gasping in the vacuum of their own false superiority. Briggs watched the heat signatures drop on his monitor. "Security teams are gone. Medical wings are gone. Command center's on fire. One corridor left untouched, just like you ordered." Merrick gave a quiet grunt of approval. "Hold our position. Don't leave. Let them see us." He moved to the observation deck, staring down at the chaos below. The Omen slowly decloaked, not completely, but just enough that it shimmered like a ghost above the burning installation. A message without words, a warning without sound. And below, the Cavor survivors, dozens of them, stared up through smoke and blood, realizing the one truth they'd spent years denying. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. Humanity was watching, judging, measuring, and delivering judgment in absolute, merciless quiet. "Transmit the mark," Merrick ordered. Arlen's hand hovered over the control. "Are we doing this now?" Merrick nodded. A single holographic symbol appeared in the sky above the depot, projected by Omen's beacon drive. It wasn't a name, or a flag, or even a threat. It was simpler than that. A closed human fist, just that. No embellishments. A symbol from old Earth, used in protests, wars, revolutions, but now used in silence. The Cavor would study that fist for weeks. Their analysts would argue about its meaning, its origin, but deep down, they would feel what it meant. It meant this isn't over. It's only begun. Back on the bridge, Briggs stared at the blinking comms feed. Still no response from Earth, no updates, no calls for reinforcements. Just more black-level directives pulsing from dead satellites. Earth had gone ghost. He muttered under his breath, "What the hell is Command playing at? Are we even part of this anymore?" Merrick heard him. "We're part of something bigger now. Command isn't talking because the talking is done. We're not here to report. We're here to erase." Briggs hesitated. "This doesn't feel like a war." Merrick turned his gaze toward him. Cold. Sharp. "That's because it's not. This is a reckoning." The next target was worse, a breeding lab on the Cavor fringe system of Sitalek. Officially, it was a genetic advancement facility, designed for interspecies medical research. But Merrick's crew had the black files, the data Earth had never released to the galactic public. What the Cavor were really doing there made most of the crew sick to their stomachs. They were experimenting on Terran prisoners, mostly colonists, some soldiers, all off the books. Biological cross-testing, organ harvesting, gene manipulation, disguised under layers of diplomacy and scientific progress, and all of it was considered acceptable by the Galactic Council. Merrick stared at the 3D projection of the lab. "No survivors this time?" Briggs nodded grimly. "Copy that." The Omen didn't fire from a distance this time. It dropped out of stealth and hovered directly over the facility, silent and monstrous. The Cavor scrambled. Security teams ran, drones lifted into the sky, but none fired. Not yet. They were still clinging to the delusion that humanity was bluffing. Then Omen opened every weapon port. Not the railguns this time, no. They used the infernal cannons, reverse-engineered from an ancient Terran war project. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't surgical. It was wrath incarnate. Fire poured from the ship, carving a crater into the lab's central core. Screams echoed. Metal tore like paper. Genetic tanks shattered, spilling unholy experiments into flame and blood. The air itself boiled. Cavor fled in all directions, firing blindly, begging for mercy. None came. Inside the lab, Briggs and a small fire team stormed through the hallways in tactical suits. They weren't there for recon. They were there to confirm. Confirm that the horrors listed in the black file were real. And they were. Briggs saw them. Terran children, half-conscious, strung up in containment pods. Marines with open skulls, brains wired into alien AI matrices. A woman, her spine replaced with something chitinous and alive, still breathing, but screaming through mutilated lungs. He raised his rifle and put her out of her misery. The fire team left no one alive. The Cavor scientists were gunned down without trial. Every data core was destroyed. Every last room was burned. When they returned to Omen, the crew didn't celebrate. There was no victory to toast, just the heavy silence of men doing what needed to be done. Merrick sat alone in his quarters afterward, staring at a faded picture of his son, one of the colonists taken years ago during the treaty years. Never confirmed, dead. Never found. He didn't need confirmation now. The image of that lab had told him everything he needed to know. He didn't cry. Not anymore. That part of him died on the same day Earth decided to go silent. But something deep inside him hardened. Something that wasn't going to break again. Not until the last Cavor lay buried in the cold void of space. Back in Cavor Central Command, panic was spreading. Reports were scattered, conflicting, and incomplete. Entire fleets going dark. Outposts silenced without a trace. A diplomatic officer collapsed in the war chamber after watching the footage from the Citalec lab. He knew what it meant. The humans weren't at war. They were making sure there would never be a war again. Not with the Cavor, not with anyone. In the absence of words, in the dead of space, humanity had become a force of nature, an extinction-level event wrapped in flesh and rage, and no one knew how to stop it. For the first time in centuries, the Cavor High Regent summoned the Emergency Council, not to strategize, but to beg, because the silence had become unbearable. The Cavor High Regent's face was cracked with age, his tendrils limp as he scanned the war chamber's reports. None of it made sense, not because of the data, but because everything made too much sense, too precise, too efficient, too human. "How many installations have we lost?" he asked, his voice dry, thinned by the pressure of humiliation. One of the aides trembled as he approached. 32 confirmed, Regent. Another 17, presumed silent. He swallowed. "We believe they're no longer operational." "No alarms?" "No, Regent. No distress signals, no broadcasts, just blackouts. And this." The aide handed over a data tablet. The display flickered once, and then settled into a single image. The closed human fist, shimmering in soft, white-blue light. The Regent stared. "A symbol?" "A message," the aide whispered. The chamber was full. Dozens of generals, policymakers, economic planners, and xenodiplomatic tacticians stood in a circle around the Regent. Most of them were silent. A few whispered. But none had answers. Their empire had never faced this before. The humans had always been noisy, in meetings, in trade, in protests, even in war. Their culture overflowed with sound, with emotion, with declarations and justifications. Now they were ghosts with weapons. Another general stepped forward, draped in ceremonial armor he hadn't worn since the Sakari campaign. "We must respond, Regent. This is not war. This is extermination. It violates every galactic code. The humans must be brought before the Council." The Regent looked up with hollow eyes. "And what will you say, General? That we broke a dozen treaties? That we bombed their colony and denied it? That we erased their scientists from records while dissecting them on Citalec?" He pointed at the display. "You think the humans care about council laws now? They gave us 20 years of chances, and we spat in every hand they offered." "They'll turn on the rest of the galaxy next," someone muttered. "No," the Regent said. "They'll burn until their memory is carved into every wall of this universe. Then they'll go quiet again, but no one will ever forget." Meanwhile, in the shadow of the Helix Rift, the TNS Omen cruised silently through fractured space, its hull barely shimmering under the dark light fields. Another Cavor station blinked out of the star charts as the crew erased another critical supply node. They didn't even bother cloaking for this one. "Another one down," Arlen said, wiping a streak of sweat from his temple. "They're not even trying to respond anymore." "They're afraid," Briggs said. "They're waiting for mercy. They think we'll blink." Merrick stood at the center of the bridge, arms folded, eyes fixed forward. They still don't get it. He stepped to the forward viewport, watching the remains of the station spin off into the void. They think we want their surrender, their apology, their shame. He turned, his voice a low growl now, the kind that makes a man's soul recoil. We don't want words anymore. We want absence of them. Their ships, their culture, their arrogance. We want their void. And that was the truth. This wasn't about reparations or political leverage anymore. This wasn't even about Earth. This was about something deeper. The principle that there must always be a cost for betrayal. That silence must be earned, not given. And when you betray a species that climbed its way from blood and fire, who held out a hand for peace and had it crushed repeatedly, you do not get to walk away. The Cavor had mistaken humanity's capacity for tolerance as weakness. Now they were learning what true weakness looked like: panic, retreat, silence born from fear. Somewhere near the neutral zone, a group of high-ranking galactic diplomats attempted to reach Earth. They sent envoys. They sent A-is. They even sent psychic frequencies embedded with non-verbal pleas for truce. Nothing returned. No signal, no ambassador, no threat, not even a refusal. Just silence. It became a message in itself. The silence was strategy now, a psychological virus infecting enemy war rooms, spreading across empires. Even allied races began to distance themselves from the Cavor. "Whatever the humans are doing," one Sarnathi commander whispered to his council, "we want no part of their crosshairs. The Cavor earned this." And the Cavor, they began to fracture. Civilian unrest, military collapse, factions arguing about how to respond. Some called for mass retaliation. Others wanted to sue for peace. One admiral went rogue, trying to initiate a preemptive strike against Terran border worlds. He never made it out of orbit. His entire fleet vanished in a single day. When the investigation reached his last coordinates, all they found was debris. And a Terran stealth mine with this engraved in the casing: "We are no longer listening." Back aboard the Omen, Merrick received a direct relay from another Terran vessel. Silent Vow. Designation unknown. Origin classified. But the message was clear. A list, coordinates, dozens of Cavor strongholds, safe zones, cultural monuments, and supply caches. Briggs stared at the file. This is a complete erasure plan." Merrick said nothing. "Captain, if we follow this, there won't be anything left of the Cavor." Still, he said nothing. Briggs stepped forward. "I know what they did. I know what we've lost. But this isn't war. This is genocide." Merrick turned slowly, his voice even. "They made this choice. Every treaty they broke, every child they took, every Terran they dissected. We begged for peace while they turned our people into projects." "But you really think wiping their species from existence is the answer?" Merrick's stare was cold enough to stop Briggs mid-breath. "Briggs, they're not being erased because they're Cavor. They're being erased because they taught the galaxy that peace is weakness, that mercy is laughable, that if you wait long enough, you can bleed a man dry and he'll keep smiling." He pointed at the console. "This isn't genocide. It's correction." Briggs didn't argue. He just stood there, stunned, as the Omen turned toward the next target. Cavor High Regent's final broadcast was a desperate plea. Not to humanity. He knew better than to expect a reply. But to the galaxy. To any species listening, this silence is not passive. It is the storm that follows every failed peace. We thought we could contain them with shame, with politics, with hierarchy. But now the humans are free from conversation. He leaned closer to the camera, tired and worn. And when a species like that stops speaking, it no longer matters how advanced your weapons are, or how many allies you have, because what you're facing isn't a military. It's a memory, one forged in betrayal, one that will outlive all of us. And then he did something no Cavor leader had done in centuries. He bowed. but no one was listening anymore. The next day, one of the galaxy's most fortified military academies vanished from existence. No explosion, no wreckage, no survivors. Just gone. In its place, a simple Terran satellite. No signal, no beacons, no sound, just a single symbol floating endlessly in space, the closed fist. They were starting to dream again. Merrick didn't know why it hit him that night. Maybe it was the stillness after the last strike. Maybe it was the way the ship had gone so quiet, even for them. Maybe it was the smell. Burnt wiring, sterilized blood, scorched metal. All of it clung to the walls like ghosts. In his dream, Earth was whole again, not the scarred, beaten world it had become, but something purer. Before the treaties, before the betrayals, green lands, blue oceans. His son was there, laughing, running through a field beneath the shadow of a Terran outpost, waving a model starship, smiling up at him. Then, as always, the field turned to ash. His son's laughter dissolved into static. He awoke drenched in sweat, jaw clenched, hand gripping the pistol under his cot. Just a dream. But Merrick didn't believe in dreams anymore, not up here in the hollow black. He rose without a word, pulled on his uniform, and returned to the bridge. The crew was already awake. No one really slept on the Omen anymore. They just closed their eyes and waited for the next mission. "Status?" he asked. Arlen looked up from his console, pale and drained. "Ping from Silent Vow. New coordinates. This one's different." Merrick approached. "How?" "It's not a military target, it's cultural. A Cavor memory vault, religious relics, history, language, species records." He stared at the screen. That list, the erasure protocol, it hadn't just been about winning a war. It was about removing the roots, making sure there was no story left to tell after the last body hit the ground. Briggs leaned against the tactical rail. "You can't be serious. That's not a strike. That's a final nail." "No response from Earth Command?" Merrick asked. Arlen shook his head. "Same as always. Silent, no blockades, no objections." Merrick nodded once, then paused. Something flickered behind his eyes. Something Briggs hadn't seen in a long time. Doubt. "Captain," Briggs said carefully, This isn't about justice anymore. This is legacy destruction. These are things that outlive war. What happens when we're done? What's left?" Merrick didn't answer right away. He looked through the viewport, eyes dark with exhaustion. "You ever hear of Ashara?" Briggs blinked. "That's a myth. From the frontier. It's real. Colony went silent after a Cavor scout raid. By the time a relief crew got there, everyone was gone. No survivors, no bodies, no logs, just missing. I thought that was a power failure." Merrick turned toward him. "My son was there." The silence between them cracked like a whip. "I didn't get a body," Merrick continued. "Didn't get a death file. Nothing to bury. Just absence. So now, that's what they get. Not war, not suffering. Absence." Briggs clenched his jaw but said nothing. What could he say? The man had already buried everything except the part of himself still delivering justice by the megaton. "Prepare the launch codes," Merrick said quietly. "We'll sterilize the vault. Full strike. Nothing left." Arlen looked like he wanted to protest, but his fingers moved automatically. Orders were orders. The Omen turned. The memory vault hovered in orbit around a dead moon, shielded and proud, its spires like open hands, waiting to preserve the culture of a species now fleeing from its own sins. Merrick stood tall at the command panel. "Target locked. Payload charged." He hesitated, just for a breath. Briggs noticed. "Captain?" But Merrick had already pressed the launch. From the ship's underbelly, 2 fusion torpedoes dropped silently into space, drifting like pearls before erupting into white fire. The vault didn't explode. It unraveled. One moment it was a structure. The next it was a storm of burning memory, torn scriptures, shattering holograms, centuries of song and story reduced to light and dust. No records, no echoes. The Cavor had built it to last forever. It lasted 7 seconds. No one spoke. Even the Omen systems seemed quieter afterward. Briggs sat down slowly. That was sacred. They made nothing sacred when they started carving into our children, Merrick said coldly. But what's left of us after this? Briggs whispered. Merrick walked off the bridge. Hours passed. Then a signal, something they hadn't received since this all began. A voice. It wasn't from Earth. It wasn't from the Cavor. It was from an old Terran vessel, the Indigo Drift, thought to be lost during the first wave of diplomatic collapses. Command said it had gone rogue. Now it sent a single audio transmission. You went too far. There's no balance left. You're not making justice. You're making ghosts. Merrick stared at it for a long time. Then he erased it. Far away, in a remote system no one had visited in decades, a quiet world received its first signal in years. It was a Terran colony, hidden, forgotten, never listed on public star charts. The signal was short. One word. Wait. The people didn't know what it meant. But the elders understood, because Earth hadn't forgotten them. And something worse was coming. Not the Cavor, not other empires. No, something deeper. What humanity was becoming. Later, on the Omen, Merrick stood in the observation chamber again, staring at a lifeless quadrant he couldn't name. Briggs entered, slower this time. No uniform. I pulled the casualty reports, he said. You were right. Ashara wasn't empty. Merrick didn't turn. Briggs continued. They found remains, recovered DNA. One of them matched your son. The silence after that wasn't triumphant. It was hollow. Merrick turned, face unreadable. He died screaming? He asked. Briggs didn't answer. Merrick nodded, then said quietly, Good. It means he died trying. The look on his face wasn't relief. It was resolve, because now he had nothing left to search for, nothing left to wonder about, only purpose. He returned to the command deck. Prep the next strike. Arlen's voice cracked. Sir, they've sent a ceasefire. Merrick's eyes narrowed. No. Captain. Number. No words. Not now. Not ever again. Briggs looked at the screen. The ceasefire was formal. Apologies. Reparation offers. Diplomatic gestures. Desperate pleas. A full surrender. It didn't matter, because this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about silence, and what you earn after crossing a species who offered peace with one hand and was handed betrayal in return. It had been 42 days since the last word left Earth's communication grid, and in that time, over 219 Cavor installations had gone dark, not destroyed in glorious battle, not reduced to ash in a wave of mass annihilation, just gone, wiped, surgical, unseen, clean, every system severed, every protocol overridden, every command voice silenced. The TNS Omen was now one of dozens, not the first, not the last, a ghost ship in a growing fleet of retribution. Others had emerged, the Quiet Blade, Echo Black, Whisper's End. Ships once mothballed, now resurrected under the Black Level protocols. Crewed by men who didn't want orders, who weren't looking for medals or headlines. Men like Merrick. Men who had been listening for too long. He stood in the command chamber, watching another Cavor outpost spin slowly into its death cycle. They hadn't even bothered firing this time. The outpost had already been stripped by another Terran vessel the night before. What remained was debris, drifting, mute and glowing faintly under distant starlight. They're running now, Arlen said from behind him. Not even trying to defend. We track their ships. They turn off engines and wait for the end. Cowards, Briggs spat. No, Merrick muttered, eyes locked forward. Not cowards. Animals who finally saw the trap they stepped into. The silence isn't chasing them. It's already here. They're just realizing it too late. Arlen turned away from the monitors. We have a new inbound. Not Cavor. Merrick stiffened. What species? Looks Sarnathi. Civilian transport, no weapons. Broadcasting wide-band Terran dialect. Wants to talk. Merrick didn't reply. He hadn't spoken to another species in weeks. Didn't plan to. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Might be worth hearing. No. Could be warning us, offering something. Maybe even intel. Merrick's jaw tensed. We already know what we need to know. Arlen hesitated. Sir, they're not Cavor. They're scared. They're asking what they should do. This time Merrick turned. He looked directly at Arlen, voice cold and without inflection. They had their chance to care. Where were they when Earth bled? When our colonies were dissected, our children vanished? When Cavor ships bombed Terra 7 and the Council called it an unfortunate accident? No one answered. Let them be afraid. It's the only intelligent response left. But we'll have no allies, Arlen whispered. We don't need allies, Merrick said. Allies need us. They're just realizing it. And with that, he cut the signal. No message returned. No translation. No curiosity. Just more silence. The Sarnathi ship drifted for hours, then turned and disappeared into subspace, leaving no trace. What no one had expected, least of all the Terran warships, was how fast the silence spread. It wasn't just the Cavor anymore. Entire trading routes were abandoned. Starports closed. Outer systems went dark without warning. Embassies shuttered overnight. Civilian colonies deleted their own transponders in fear of being mistaken for enemy holdouts. Some sent messages begging for forgiveness. Others asked for protection. Most simply vanished from the grid. The universe, for all its size and arrogance, had never felt this kind of pressure. The pressure of silence. Of knowing that the one species you once mocked, once restrained, once ordered to behave, had finally stopped pretending to care what anyone thought. Briggs walked the corridors of the Omen, silent for once. The crew didn't talk anymore unless necessary. Orders were hand-signed, reports scrawled on digital slates, music silenced, recreational systems locked. Noise wasn't just discouraged, it felt wrong. He entered Merrick's private chamber. No knock. Formalities had died back around day 20. Merrick sat at a table, sorting through data logs. Briggs cleared his throat. We need to talk. Merrick didn't look up. Then talk. Briggs stepped forward. We've done it. We've won. Merrick said nothing. We've destroyed every major Cavor fleet. Their leadership has collapsed. Their culture's in shambles. The galaxy's already on its knees. We've made our point. Still nothing. Briggs pressed. What's the mission now, Merrick? What are we still doing out here? Now Merrick looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, he spoke with something other than rage. What do you think they'll remember, Briggs? Briggs blinked. What? When all this is over, when they rebuild, when history is rewritten, what do you think they'll remember? Briggs frowned. That we fought back, that we took a stand. No, Merrick said. They'll remember that for once. Humanity said nothing. And the galaxy listened. That's the only thing that matters now. But at what cost? Briggs asked. We're not heroes. We're not even soldiers anymore. We're just executioners in the dark. Merrick stood. We offered peace. They mocked it. We gave treaties. They wiped their asses with them. Then we shut our mouths and showed them what our silence really means. He walked past Briggs, brushing him on the shoulder. "You think the cost is too high? Then get off this ship." Briggs didn't move, because he couldn't. Not really. He knew Merrick was right. There were no good men left out here, only witnesses. The Omen's final mission came without fanfare, a single coordinate, one line of code, an anonymous relay. Destination, the Cavor homeworld. Not a military base, not a tactical point. The cradle, where it all began. Arlen sat in silence, staring at the map. This is genocide." Merrick didn't reply. Briggs whispered, "We crossed that line, we're not coming back." "Not as warriors, not even as men." Merrick finally looked up. "We crossed that line the moment we buried our children in orbit." Briggs's voice broke. "And what's left after this, Captain?" "Who do we become?" Merrick stepped forward, eyes cold, empty. "We become the thing they warned their children about. We become the silence they'll never speak over again." The crew stared at him. No one objected. Because when you burn everything down, the silence becomes home. As the Omen approached Cavor's home system, defenses folded without a fight. Civilian vessels deactivated weapons. Orbital platforms powered down. Even planetary AIs failed to respond. It was over before it started. Merrick stood on the bridge, watching the planet spin slowly below them. It was green. Beautiful. Peaceful. The irony almost made him laugh. Briggs stared beside him, silent. "Orders, Captain?" Arlen asked. Merrick hesitated. Not out of mercy, but because some part of him wondered if there was anything left to kill. Then he spoke. "Don't fire." Briggs turned to him, stunned. Merrick continued. "Let them live. Let them rebuild. Let them remember. But never answer them. Never speak to them. Never acknowledge them." He pointed at the planet below. "Let them look up and wonder, every single day, if we're still watching." He walked away. And for the first time in weeks, the crew exhaled. Because the most terrifying punishment wasn't death. It was being ignored by something you feared. Forever. The Omen left the system without a trace. No broadcasts, no signals. Just a single symbol left on the moon in orbit. A closed human fist. And beneath it, one sentence etched into the rock. "We heard everything. This is our answer." 3 weeks passed after the Omen left the Cavor home system. No Terran ship was seen in that sector again. No follow-up strikes, no messages, no diplomatic envoys, just silence stretching across the stars like a blanket of lead. The kind of silence that presses down on a soul, not just with fear, but with guilt. Because even as the Cavor rebuilt, as their survivors gathered and tried to assemble meaning from the ashes, they understood something that couldn't be written in any language. They had been allowed to live, not spared, not forgiven, allowed. The humans had looked down on the origin world of their enemy, saw its children, its monuments, its open cities, and simply walked away. And that was the cruelest strike of all, not because it left the Cavor intact, but because it left them haunted. By the question, why? Why were we not finished? Why did they stop? What do they want now? There was no answer. The council tried to regain order. Emergency meetings were held in neutral systems. Delegates debated what humanity had become. Were they still part of the galactic community? Had they formed a new government? Did they still have a command structure at all? But no one knew. Earth itself remained silent. No incoming or outgoing transmissions. All Terran ships operated independently under old black-level codes. No hierarchy, no chain of command, no treaties, just quiet operatives, moving like phantoms across the stars, removing obstacles without debate. The humans had not abandoned diplomacy. They had outgrown it. On board the Omen, the silence had become something else entirely. A lifestyle. A code. The crew didn't speak unless required. Every system operated in stealth mode, even when there was no longer an enemy to hide from. They passed ships sometimes, traders, refugees, patrol vessels from distant factions, but never acknowledged them. They watched, they logged, and they passed like ghosts. Briggs sat alone in the mess hall, stirring a ration cube with a plastic utensil. He wasn't hungry. No one was. They didn't eat to live anymore. They just kept the machine running. Merrick entered, slow, heavy-footed. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 months, not in body, but in soul. He sat across from Briggs, and for a long moment neither said a word. Finally, Briggs broke it. "You know we're done, right?" Merrick didn't answer. "There's nothing left to wipe. The Cavor surrendered. The galaxy's afraid of us. Most systems won't even say the word human anymore. Hell, I heard a merchant in the Adrani system renamed Earth the Black World on his star map. Said he didn't want to attract attention." Merrick's eyes were distant. "That's the point." Briggs leaned in, voice low. "No, that's the problem. What's the point now? We've won, Merrick. You got your silence. What do you want from the universe now? Total darkness? You want us to drift until even we don't remember why we started?" Merrick looked up, and for the first time in the entire campaign, he looked tired. Not worn down, tired in the way a man gets when he's finally realized the road he walked can never take him home. He spoke softly. "Do you know what it's like to believe in peace?" Briggs blinked. "Yeah, I used to believe it was possible before—" "No," Merrick interrupted. "Not believe it was possible. I mean to truly believe in it. As a religion, as a purpose. I used to think we were better than our past. That we could evolve. That we didn't need blood to prove we were strong." He stared at the table. "Then I watched my son vanish into a database error. I watched council judges laugh behind closed doors. I watched treaties be signed in ink made of lies, while we buried another colony with every pen stroke." He looked up again, and this time, the fire returned. "And then I understood. Peace isn't something you get. It's something you impose." Briggs didn't speak. He couldn't. "We made them listen, not because we begged, but because we stopped explaining ourselves. We became what the galaxy needed, a warning." He stood and left. Briggs sat alone, stirring food he couldn't taste, listening to the empty hum of a ship with nowhere left to go. In the Cavor ruins, a historian named Yelrick began a personal archive. Not a public one. He knew it would never pass censorship, but a secret collection of what really happened. He gathered footage, stories, data, wreckage, every trace of humanity's silent war. And as he pieced it together, one horrifying truth began to form. It wasn't about military power. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about control. A kind of control no empire had ever used before. Psychological, cultural, existential. The humans had changed the very rules of warfare by removing the part that made it predictable. They'd removed their voice, and by doing so had taken control of everyone else's. Yelrick sat in his bunker, watching the last known footage of a human stealth cruiser passing silently over a Cavor evacuation line, choosing not to fire. And he whispered to no one but himself, "They are no longer conquerors. They are reminders." Back on the Omen, Arlen approached Merrick in the command chamber. "There's something I think you should see." Merrick didn't respond. Arlen activated the main display. It flickered, then displayed a single long-range relay intercepted from a distant edge of unclaimed space. It was garbled, but a few words emerged. A voice, young, desperate. "If any Terran vessel receives this, my name is Daxon, born New Canaan Colony. I don't know if Earth still listens, but if anyone out there still remembers who we are, please, I need help." Merrick's fingers hovered over the console. It wasn't a Cavor voice. It wasn't counsel. It was one of theirs. Briggs entered, noticed the message. He said nothing. Merrick stared at the screen, frozen. He had silenced the galaxy. He had made them kneel. But now, here was a voice from the very edge of the dark, crying out not in defiance or threat, but in need. A Terran voice. Briggs stepped forward, quietly. "We made them all listen, Captain. Maybe now it's time to speak." The words hung in the air. Merrick didn't reply, but his hand moved. He tapped a single key. And for the first time in 70 days, the Omen transmitted a message. No speeches, no threats, no ultimatums, just 2 words. "We hear." They said the first sound to break the silence would be thunder. They were wrong. It was a whisper. "We hear." 2 words, transmitted from the TNS Omen into the vastness of deep space. 2 words sent in response to a dying voice on the edge of the galaxy. A voice not of an enemy, not of a diplomat, but of a boy. A Terran boy, stranded beyond known space, reaching blindly across a silent galaxy for someone, anyone, to answer. And someone did. The moment Merrick pressed that transmission key, the silence broke. Not with fanfare, not with flashing lights or roaring engines, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. Briggs stood on the bridge beside Merrick, neither man speaking. They both knew what this meant. Not just for them or for the Omen, but for every Terran vessel still out there. Ghost fleets, rogue Black Ops crews, the forgotten battalions and long-range destroyers still carrying out the last breath of humanity's vengeance. "We just turned the lights back on," Briggs murmured. Merrick didn't flinch. "Not for the galaxy." Briggs nodded. "For us." He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply stood there, a soldier, a man who had become a weapon, and now, perhaps, was trying to become something else. The silence had been necessary. Merrick still believed that. But now, after so many systems gone dark, after erasing the history of an entire species, after watching the galaxy tremble at every Terran shadow, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, humanity hadn't lost the war, but something far worse. It had lost itself. Until that voice came through. The voice of someone who hadn't asked for revenge, only for someone to listen. They found him 4 days later. Daxon, 17, malnourished, alone, living aboard a drifting civilian freighter with decaying engines and no FTL core. The logs told the story. New Canaan colony was attacked during the early days of the breakdown. Not by the Cavor, but by pirates emboldened by the power vacuum. The Council had issued protection, but pulled it last minute to avoid provoking Terran aggression. Daxon's family was slaughtered, his ship left adrift, unnoticed by the wider war. He'd been floating for almost a month, surviving on broken rations, waiting, transmitting into a void. When Merrick and a recovery crew boarded the derelict ship, they found him crouched in a corner, eyes sunken but still alert. Not a victim. Not weeping. Waiting. Merrick stepped into the chamber. The boy looked up. There was no fear. "You're Terran," Daxon said. Merrick nodded once. Daxon stood, his voice cracking. "You heard me." "We did," Daxon swallowed. "So, is it over?" Merrick didn't answer at first. The question hung there like a blade. "Not yet," he said. "But you may be the beginning of something better." The Omen took him aboard. The crew didn't cheer. There was no celebration, just movement, just duty. But something shifted that day. The noise came back. Little things. A song hummed under someone's breath during shift change. Laughter, quiet, nervous, during a card game that hadn't happened since the early weeks of the campaign. A voice raised in frustration over a broken actuator. It wasn't much, but it was sound. Merrick stood in his quarters that night, staring at an old, hollow photo. His son. Frozen forever at 12. Smiling under a Terran flag. That image used to hurt. Now, it still did, but it also pulled at him. Maybe this is what he'd have wanted, he muttered. Word spread, the transmission that cracked the silence. Not to the Cavor, not to the Council, but among Terrans, from ship to ship, stealth cruiser to rogue destroyer, not in public channels, not in headlines, in shadows, in secret corridors, in whispered corridors aboard ships that had long since forgotten joy. 2 words. We hear. And with that, they began to come home. One by one, Terran ships returned to Earth's orbit. Quietly. Not to report, not to brag, but to simply be, to exist again among their own. Merrick brought the Omen back on day 97. The homeworld had changed. Orbital docks buzzed with activity, half military, half reconstruction. The planetary defense grid still hung thick around the atmosphere, but it no longer pointed outward with paranoia. It waited. Earth was listening. The Omen landed at Black Site Echo, once a classified base, now a transitional station for warships coming out of silent ops. When Merrick disembarked with Daxon, no one saluted. No bands, no medals, just quiet nods, the kind given between soldiers who know they were never meant to win, only to survive long enough to become warnings. Daxon looked out over the horizon. "Is this Earth?" he asked. Merrick nodded. "It's uglier than I thought." Merrick smirked. "Yeah, but it's ours." There were hearings, of course, not trials. No one dared put Terran officers on stand for what had happened. Not publicly, but committees met behind closed doors. Whispers passed through back channels. Words like accountability and legacy and consequences floated across council floors, where humans were once unwelcome. The Cavor didn't press charges. They wouldn't dare. They didn't even send diplomats. Just a single offering, an unencrypted file. Names, logs, the full truth of every treaty they broke, every atrocity, every betrayal. Merrick never read it. He didn't need proof. He had already seen the truth, buried in the stars. But Earth kept the file anyway. Not for evidence, for memory. Because silence had never been about revenge. It had always been about remembering what got you there. Months passed. The war was never officially declared over. There was no ceremony, no surrender document, but everyone knew it was done. The galaxy had changed. The balance of power shattered. No species would ever underestimate humanity again, not because they feared Terran weapons, but because they feared what silence turned humans into. No longer diplomats, not conquerors, not victims. Something new, something patient, something cold. And when Earth finally spoke again, it didn't do so through speeches or ultimatums. It sent Daxon, the boy who called into the void, and was answered. He stood before the new Terran assembly. Small, nervous, but clear-eyed. He didn't talk about pain or fear or war. He talked about voices, how silence had kept him alive, how a whisper had saved him, and how, maybe, humanity didn't need to shout to be strong. Maybe now it was time to listen again. In the dark corners of space, Cavor children asked their elders why the sky was so quiet. And the old ones, shaking, would whisper a phrase now etched into their bones. Because the humans are listening. And that was enough to make them behave, enough to make them remember, enough to keep the silence sacred. Because in the end, it was never about whether humanity would speak again. It was about when, and whether the galaxy would be ready when they did.